angel investor. Have been doing that for about 23 years. I've made over 100 investments in various technology companies over that time period. And I'm also a limited partner in a number of institutional venture capital funds. So I have some insight into how the institutional VC world works as well. I'm been a member of the Band of Angels for, I guess, almost 20 years, and I'm the founding chairman of Jumpstart NJ Angel Network. So that's kind of an overview of what I've been doing lately. My career started way back when I got a PhD at Carnegie Mellon. I was a National Science Foundation fellow and was a professor there for a while before I went into industry. I was research project manager with Exxon. I also had, I was a captain in the Corps of Engineers during the Vietnam War era. And then I got into corporate planning and with Engelhard Corporation. I had 8 promotions there up to the senior VP level. So I was running billion-dollar businesses around the world. And decided I really wanted to, I had a lot more fun on new ventures. So I did a leverage buyout of a small company, special advanced materials company, built that up for a number of years and got an offer I couldn't refuse, sold it, and then realized I was going to fail retirement because I would get bored. So that's kind of my background up to this point when I started doing angel investing. I also have some side interests, which maybe Jim will want to allude to at some point. But why don't I pass it back to you, Jim, and see what how you want to go from here.
Sure, thanks, Wayne. So obviously you've been doing this for a while. So tell us more about, you know, the background when you got started, and then how things have changed over the years, and then talk about how the market is different on the East Coast as opposed to the West Coast.
Yeah, well, the venture field has gone through cycles. It always does, and a lot of people don't really think of it in historical perspective. You can go back to the early, if you stick with this country, back to the early days of whaling and shipping industries, where they actually formed limited liability companies, pioneered in England or Great Britain, and really made possible to bring investors together with the general partners, who in those days were the captains or the owners of the ships. So it's a long evolution, but there's been some periods of frenzy, leading up to the dot-com bubble burst in 2002, and then the Great Recession in 2008, which was not technology investment related, but certainly impacted it. So one thing that has happened through that is a more formalization of angel investments. The individuals have financed things, throughout history, but the formation of angel networks has largely been, I think, facilitated by the use of the internet, so that people can share due diligence, more efficiently, and work with the companies more efficiently. So that's been a big change, but still, I'd say the majority of angel investments still happen outside of the formal networks. So that's one thing that has really changed, and I think that there's been a more sophistication in terms of deal structures, and more standardization of deal structures, but every deal is different.
Right. Okay, so talk to us a little bit more about the Broadway. That is a really unique aspect of your history. Talk to us
Oh,
about that.
yeah, I didn't answer your. I'll do that, but I forgot. I didn't answer your question about East Coast, West Coast, since I'm back and forth. I think there's a very interesting cultural difference. Um, since a lot of my career has been international, you know, the perception of failure is so different. Like if you try something and fail in Japan or Europe, you'll probably never get another chance. The On the West Coast, people wear failed startups almost like a badge of honor. That I worked on this with this company, or I started this, or what that, and it didn't work out. But boy, we learned a lot. And the East Coast, I think we're out in the East Coast. We're kind of schizophrenic. We admire people who have taken risks and started things, but we're most happy on the East Coast investing in with people who've done it before. So that's one big difference. I think another difference has been there's been a lot more emphasis on the West Coast. Out there, we look for really rapid growth opportunities, and an awful lot of investment money is thrown at companies when they can't necessarily use it efficiently, but there's kind of a seed and weed mentality, which is, much less concern about companies failing on the West Coast than there is on the East Coast. Coming around the theater, my interest in theater goes back to my early days. I was a violinist of some talent, and I had to decide whether I wanted to pursue a career in music or science. And I had played with symphony orchestras, and I had a lot of appreciation for the arts of all types. So when I ended up going the science route, I maintained my interest in live theater, and spent 12 years on boards of theater or opera boards, and have invested in about 40 shows in Broadway and in London. It's not something you do to make a lot of money. I think the last time I checked, I was just about breaking even, which is actually very good in that field. But it's very interesting. I started doing it in 1994. My first investment in a Broadway show was Smokey Joe's Cafe, which was very successful, both in the Broadway and the London, and actually some other countries. And I got a couple times my money back, and I thought, oh, that's easy, And then my second one was an artistic success and a total financial failure. So that's kind of the way it goes in investing in the arts. You got to expect that to some extent you're doing it as philanthropy to support the arts.
Great. So Wayne, let's talk about, you have a really good knowledge of entrepreneurs and what they should be doing now regarding fundraising and managing their startups, right? But you also have, let's start with that. And then we could talk about what your recommendations are for folks who are investing in companies, other investors, other angel investors, because there's a whole group of folks who are looking to potentially invest in companies, maybe not right today, but in the near future. So why don't we take the entrepreneurs first? And I also want to tell our audience to submit questions in the Q&A prompt on the bottom of your Zoom window. I will, in a few minutes, I will pick off some of those questions and ask Wayne to answer them for us. So until we get to that point, feel free to submit them, and I will take them from there. So Wayne, talk about entrepreneurs. It's obviously an extremely difficult time right now. What can you share with entrepreneurs as far as what they should be considering in the near term and the medium term?
Well, I think it's always true, but it's even more so true now that um, your competition as an entrepreneur is not usually somebody doing what you're doing. And this is something I've found that people don't understand. And so when I'm, working with an early stage company, I try to help them focus on this. The competition is someone else who's competing for the resources and attention of your customer. And so non-adoption is your biggest competitor. It's not somebody doing exactly what you're doing. In fact, if somebody's doing exactly what you're doing, maybe you should be doing something else. And if you're trying to sell to enterprises, enterprise can't really deal with more than one or two major changes in the same year, in the same budget cycle, because it's a very cumbersome transition for them, and they need to manage that process. So I think the selling process is very important to figure out what the dynamics of your customer are, even when your customers are smaller businesses, because they don't have the bandwidth to handle too many things at once. So I think a lot of people get into the trap of having their potential customers show some interest, but just the sell cycle is so long because they're not getting to the front of the line. And so being able to figure out which customers are ready and will work with you quickest, is really important. And now, right now, with the whole world and the whole business world distracted, it's even more important to realize that you've got to somehow get to the front of the queue. I guess another thing I would say to entrepreneurs is, if you're looking for funding, don't cold call. Cold calling is a waste of time, and some investors will even take it as a negative because it may indicate that you don't really know, what's involved in fundraising. So the important thing is to get introduced by credible people that know you and know the potential investor, who can say, I think you two should talk. Those people can be ideally other investors, but it can be professionals, accountants, lawyers, some cases universities, making those introductions, because then at least there's a statistically better chance of a fit, because somebody has put a little bit of their credibility on the line to make that introduction. Another thing I would say to entrepreneurs, it's, again, almost anything you can say is more important now, is do due diligence on potential investors. What do they invest in? What stage are they in their investment cycle? If they're an institutional fund, they may have a 10-year life, and they're not going to be doing much with anything new after the midpoint of the fund, because they're going to be supporting their early investments. And with angel investors, it can be somewhat the same thing. Really understand where they're coming from and so forth. And then the other thing is you want value added smart money, and people that will feel that working with you and supporting you, that they can help your odds of success, will make them more likely to make an investment. I guess the other thing that comes to mind right now is when you're talking about technology. Technology does not sell a product. Technology can speed up the scaling of product sales, but the technology itself is not the product. And I think that's a distinction that often gets lost. The products are so cool, but they aren't for the most part, the technology is just a way of making the product faster, more efficient, perhaps do something that couldn't be done before. The technology is just a tool to increase the scaling.
Okay, great. Thank you, Wayne. We have a bunch of questions coming in, so let me start picking them off because they relate to some of the things you've just been talking about. So I think most people know this, but Janice asks, do you invest in startups that haven't received funding yet? So can you just update us on that?
Yes. I should say that when I first started, I kind of thought I would be the Lone Ranger, and I still have, been the first and only investor in something. But for the most part, I look for opportunities to collaborate with other investors, whether it's individuals, angel groups, or VC funds, because I think, collectively we can do a much better job for everybody, the company, the investors, and so forth, by collaborating and bringing different kinds of skills to bear. So I think it's very important to have some proof of market acceptance, whether it's ideally it's repeat sales. If there's no sales, then I like to see somebody that has put their resources into working with you, whether it's working with you on your beta product, doing beta testing. Someone that has shown that if the product or service can be made available, they want to buy it. It's not essential that you have, a lot of revenue, but there has to be some tangible proof of customer, motivation.
So Mark asks, do you think seed stage is better positioned than early stage right now, given that they are typically 2 to 3 years away anyway, as opposed to an early stage company which is stuck in the recovery?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can generalize. I mean, I understand the question that you're investing in the future, and the future isn't next month. So, seed stage still has to have traction, and that traction means some level of burn rate on their internal costs, but also means that they have to get their potential customers motivated, and their potential customers may be somewhat paralyzed right now. So there can be a company that has got some customer traction, some sales, and they're better positioned to ride through this crisis because they have revenue and they have proof of concept, and that may justify additional funding. So I think in talking with other angels and VCs, I think a lot of people are thinking in the immediate time here. Let's look at our portfolio companies and see how they're reacting to the situation, and can we help them either with advice or possibly additional funding, and as opposed to the seed investment, which is brand new from scratch, but yet that seed investment might hit the market in a couple of years when things are hopefully back to some semblance of normality. So I don't see a single answer to that question. Okay.
So Clark Lagerman asks, and Clark is one of the partners in hosting this event from Scarlet Startup. So thank you, Clark, for all your help. But he asks, how do you specifically help your companies or your investments become more successful? Is it a number of things like coaching or intros or what?
Yeah. Well, and this is where the collaboration of investors can sometimes be beneficial, because you bring more than one skill set to bear. I've been on company boards. I'm pretty limited, in terms of time to devote to that. Sometimes I'll speak generally, not just about myself. A board observer role enables investors to be sufficiently informed of what's going on to be helpful, but without the fiduciary responsibility that being a full board member entails, which is actually, if it's done right, it's a lot of work. And sometimes, frankly, I'm riding somebody else's coattails that has more expertise in the field than I do, and had occasionally people ride my coattails. So the important thing is that ideally somebody is working with the company to help them, whether it's in things that are very specific to their business, or some is just general management. If you run a lot of businesses in different industries and you've bought and sold companies, as I have, sometimes I can offer general advice, even if I am not on the board, but an issue comes up and somebody reaches out and says, hey, we're taking a pulse of our shareholders. What do you think? You have any suggestions, or do you know anybody? Yada, yada, yada. So there's a lot of ways that can be done. And, it can range from being totally passive to being roll up the sleeves and get in. But time-wise, you can only do a certain number of those.
Okay. Regarding VCs and investors, how do you think funding is going to change in the near future? John also wants to know, are VCs going to limit, or angels going to limit their portfolio drastically, where it's going to even get harder to get funding?
My sense is that people are not just closing the door. That people realize that there's a time cycle in terms of learning about opportunities, investigating them, working with people. I think the short term is, and by that I mean next couple of months, I think there's definitely a substantial slowdown. As VC funds, there's huge amounts of cash looking for work. So I don't think, in terms of the funds that have have a new fund or a fund cycle, they're going to deploy that money. And in terms of angels are, it's discretionary funding. Nobody has to write a check as an angel. And personal stock portfolios and bond portfolios, actually bonds have gone up, but personal investment portfolios in public securities took a huge drop, and now they've bounced back, roughly halfway. I think that, is causing people to, be a bit cautious. I don't think the professional investors are going to go away. There's a term, tourist angels, that you might have heard. These are people that, they don't know much about it, and they think it's kind of cool, and they make an investment or two. And if it doesn't go well, they kind of get scared and run away, or if the market falls. So I think some of the tourist angels, will withdraw. I think that people that are serious about it will persist, but there may be a lot of pressure down on valuations, because the business plan projections are going to be less attractive in terms of their timing. It's going to take quite a while to rebuild certain sectors. So I think that'll be reflected in valuations of some businesses. But there are a few businesses, and I've fortunately been involved in some, where this crisis is made to order for them. and they're very much more in demand than they would have been. So it's not a total gloom and doom scenario.
Okay. Janice wants to know, what is the number one trait or quality in entrepreneurs that you notice and that lead to success?
Ooh. I would, if I had to pick one thing, I would say it's the ability to sell. And if there's, two founders or three founders, at least one of them really needs to be able to sell. And I mean, seriously sell. And, I see a lot of people that have a strong background in research or technology, and their business plan is, well, we're going to hire a vice president of sales, and or we're going to use manufacturers, distributors, or something, and that's not enough. It's really important to be able to sell, and people that entrepreneurs that realize the importance of that, and have that their plan includes getting the right go-to-market strategy in place early on. I think that's probably the most important thing. I mean, you can list a lot of other things. I mean, look for people that are ethical and honest, that are smart, not necessarily brilliant, but smart. Persistent. That's very, very important. Committed. But like I say, I really look, when I see somebody that I think can sell the hell out of the product, I like that.
Got it. So we're still, we have a few more questions. I'm still going to ask for more questions. Please submit them now. Let me take one here, Wayne. So there's some investors from outside the U.S. on this chat, and I wanted to see what advice you're giving to other investors in general, whether they're inside or outside the country or not.
Well, if they're outside the country, they clearly have to have some way of being well connected. Either they have affiliates or associates, or somebody on the ground in the area that they're looking at. So I don't know if I can say anything terribly specific about that in terms of external investors. If they're corporate strategic investors, they probably have good ways to make those kinds of connections. I think in terms of what to invest in, things are very faddish, and very often the crowd is wrong. So if we talk about what sectors are good, there's a book that I highly recommend. Let me see if I can get this so that it can be seen. It's called Extraordinarily Popular Delusions in the Madness of Crowds. Looks like it's coming up backwards on the screen. This book is the most important book I've ever read. I make a point of reading it at least once every 3 years. It was written in the 1840s, and I learned about it reading the autobiography of Bernard Baruch, famous financier in this country. He came across this book in 1929. And in his autobiography, he said, I read this and I said, my God, it's happening again. And he sold everything before the crash in 1929. After the crash, he came back in. He was all cash, and he became even more wealthy and influential. And at one point, he even helped save the country's finances. And I think that there's very often the crowd is just plain wrong. You read that book, you see so many examples through history. And there have been some books, it's now a famous book, and there have been sequels written where people have said, well, let's look since the 1840s, how many other examples. And, it's almost like pick up a newspaper or, a business magazine, and you find these examples. So the fads come and go, and in terms of what to invest in, there are things that they get hot, and wow, some of the clean tech things. Oh, solar photovoltaics. So there were over 100 startups in that space. Well, typically only 2 or 3 survivors in any industry eventually. The rest of them all either drop out or get acquired. Artificial intelligence, blockchain, some of the cancer cures, just many fields. And if you go back through this book, you'll see examples from the tulip mania, the South Sea bubble, and so forth, where people just get fascinated by a hot field and they want to jump into it, and valuations get way too high, and weak players, weak companies get created, and then the whole thing shakes out. And so, in terms of advice for investors, I don't know. I mean, it's not original with me by any means, but I think it's still good advice. Is don't follow the herd blindly, but try to look ahead, see what's going to actually be hot 5 years from now or 2 years.
And that book looks fascinating. I'm looking forward to reading that. So, and it came up fine, and I think there'll be a bunch of interest. So Rob is just building on your comment about different areas of investment, but what are some of your investments that are thriving in the current environment?
Well, the one that just comes right to mind, well, let me say this. I've invested in a number of healthcare type businesses where they're going through a cycle of product development, clinical trials. Those are doing fine. They're generally on track, and we'll see how it works out for all of them. But those kinds of things they're pre-revenue, except for grants and for sales to their initial beta customers. But one that's really benefited is a company called Neuroflow, which is an artificial intelligence data and patient engagement company that's dealing with mental health issues and integrating mental health with physical health. And the COVID-19 is, just demonstrated huge amount of need for what they're doing, and they're getting, people, they're getting into some short sell cycles, and some of their existing customers are, thrilled that they have it. So, and they're hiring, and so like I said before, there are some businesses that actually are doing better, faster, and there's others that are just impacted tremendously. Anything you do with, well, first of all, I should say in general, I don't invest in consumer businesses. I'm a B2B, business to business guy, or business to consumer. And a lot of those consumer businesses, whether it's hotels, travel, airlines, restaurants, are really, really hurting. And for the most part, those are not, big technology sectors. The technology applications in those sectors are more enabling what's there, as opposed to creating any new sectors.
Right. So, Wayne, someone asked for you to repeat the name of the book in case they're on a call. Can you repeat it clearly one more time?
Yeah. Again, I don't know if you can read it, but it's
So it's the extraordinary.
Extraordinarily Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And the author is Charles Mackay, Mackay.
Got it. Okay.
I think you can probably Google, even if you don't get all the words right.
Okay.
So, it'll come out. If you do Charles Mackay, that's
okay.
Come up for sure.
Got it. So
it's out of copyright. That's why it's obviously very available.
So Wayne, what is one of your best investments? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm always a little reluctant to talk about specific companies because sometimes there's confidential information, and sometimes I don't like to talk about negative things at all. One that I think probably most people in New Jersey know was Achieve 3000, which was an education technology company, homegrown in New Jersey, and they had a new concept of education, which I totally bought into. So I invested, as an early angel, and got a very nice return from that. And also, I look for things where there is a huge social need that's not being, and part of the reason I do that is not that I'm doing it to be charitable at all, but just you don't have to solve the whole problem. If you just solve a part of it, the need is so great. So I've been looking and investing in things like education and workforce development, environmental and energy, things where the numbers are potentially really big, and if you penetrate part of it with a partial solution, you're going to do really well.
Great. So let's switch gears a little bit as we wind this down, Wayne. You are so special because you're like a Renaissance man. You own a vineyard. You've traveled to over 100 countries.
160 actually.
160, which is insane. So tell us a bit about, let's just talk about that for a second. You've traveled all around the world. Is there any advice you could give to people who are thinking about traveling in general? Again, these days, not so fun, but eventually we will get out and about. What's been sort of the most satisfying thing about your travels?
Well, my wife and I, what we like is educational adventure travel. So we want to learn things, but different cultures, different geographies, different social, economic systems. So, and also sometimes that means going to some pretty remote areas that are not easy to get to. So that's what we like to do. But I think, that's us. Not everybody has, the same objective. Some people just want to go and relax, and that's perfectly logical, especially if you don't have, a lot of time to do it. But I think it opens your mind. I like to collect quotations about travel. I've got, a couple hundred of them, I think now, because, travel is the most enlightening thing you can do. It cuts across every field, and it makes you think. It makes you re-examine everything in your own life. So yeah, I think it's great.
Is there someone asked a question about, are there clubs that they should connect with if they're interested in traveling extensively?
Yeah. Well, there's something called the Traveler's Century Club, which is it's headquartered out of Los Angeles. They have chapters around the U.S. and some overseas chapters. The term Century Club refers to people that have been to 100 countries, but they have, I think it's called a provisional membership or something. People have been to 50 countries. And the local chapters are, they're pretty open. They're not, the membership requirement is one thing, but in terms of just being able to go and meet people, they're pretty friendly. So that's one. There's some internet-based communities that for frequent travelers that are not membership, but you can just sign up, and it's also useful that you can log all your trips in the database that they maintain, which is sometimes helpful when you're trying to think, what the heck, when was it that I went to so and so, and what was the name of that place, and
So the other thing that's interesting is that you run a vineyard. Is it two vineyards? Is it one in South America and one in California?
Yes, I'm a partner in Kaluna Vineyards in Sonoma County, California. So I'm involved in the business side, but not at all in the winemaking or the agriculture. Then we have a partner's house that the partners take turns using. So we go there when we can, which is right now not happening right now. But then in Argentina, we own vineyards and a villa, and we have a winery that we're co-owners of. We produce our wines under the name Tamarelli Vineyards down there, and so there we have I have complete control over the decisions that we make in terms of our objectives in farming, quality of grapes, the type of wines we want to make, the styles, and so forth. Obviously, we're not there all the time. We usually go about 3 times a year for a couple of weeks, and the people down there that handle the day-to-day affairs are very good. So, we communicate, back and forth between visits.
So what have you learned from that business? Is there any takeaways that we can apply?
Well, as a city boy, I knew nothing about agriculture. So to me, originally I was a chemical engineer. So the science of it, is fascinating. And the fact that you have, in terms of data, big data, you've got far more variables than you'll ever have data points. So you have to try like heck to figure out how to deal with what Mother Nature gives you, which is different from one day to the next and 1 year to the next. And it's a great industry because people are really open and sharing, because you can learn from each other. And if your neighbor, a quarter mile away, did something different in a certain weather history, and you'd like to share notes and compare. So it's a great industry. I'm not in it to make a lot of money, because they say the old joke is the way to make a small fortune in wine is to start with a large fortune. But we do sell our wines online. We have an online store, and in California, it's a fully developed business. And like I said, I'm not involved in the operational details, just as a partner.
Oh, that's fascinating. Good to know for those of us considering creating or running a vineyard. So Wayne, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I know we have a tradition of closing out these sessions with a poem. So can you share with us a poem?
Yeah, you told me you were going to do that. I picked a poem that I think a lot of people would have heard of. Pretty famous. It's called "If" by Rudyard Kipling. And it's written in the sense of being advice to a young man, but equally applies to young women. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll read about half of it. If you can keep your head down when all are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss. If all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. So I think
That is
inspirational.
I enjoyed that. I think our audience did too. Thank you so much, Wayne, for coming out today.